I'd like to make sure everybody has an opportunity to present their input to the process. Where this came from, we have been considering for some time an action which will become a part of Amendment 18 that proposes to draft regulations to manage and conserve
the area I've historically fished is now experiencing what I believe to be at least double the fishing effort that it can withstand. Without some immediate emergency intervention from National Marine Fisheries, it may be too late.
We are going to lose, and this is really a key issue for New England, we're going to lose the iconic small fishing town, small fishing village, small fishing boat, small fishing family, which is it's not just a myth. It's not something that we see in political commercials. It's real. It's in the room here. And as industrialized fishing is huge money. Look, there are mistakes in sector management. You have time to fix them. And I'm sure that the council's creativity, there are so many options that could fix this. It'll be hard to choose the right ones, I'm sure. But even as simple as inshore and offshore.
We see boats that have traditionally fished offshore, larger boats that never fish there, that due to their allocation and their trading abilities have turned up there and literally wiped the place out.
Years at a time it takes to rebuild those because of forced concentrated fishing. The ocean is not meant to, have 10, 20 boats in one small area fishing it that hard. Certain areas can sustain more fishing than others. And that's what's going to happen. The bigger the company, they're going to be told where to fish, when to fish, and even if the captain cares about what he's doing, the damage he's doing, it won't matter because he's working for somebody that doesn't care.
For the first time, and I'm only 25. I've been fishing for 10 years now. I mean, I'm no old salt, but for the first time in my career, I've seen 100-foot draggers in a marine sanctuary. Now, I don't really understand how that works, putting all that kind of fishing pressure in a sanctuary. And for the first time in my life, and I believe in my father's life, we can't make a living in the wintertime doing what we've done our entire lives.
Back in 2009, we had a cod stock that every day we'd go out and get, our 800 pounds, more sometimes. Now you go out there and it's a joke if you get 500 pounds. I mean, come on. It's wiped out.
One example of how consolidation is affecting this area is that the new fleet of large offshore boats has been allowed to come in and harvest so much of the local resource that some small boat fishermen have been unable to catch their quota and opted to lease it out. Most of this quota is getting leased to the bigger boats.
So, because of that, I feel that the status quo is just not acceptable. There are too many loose ends in this thing that were never addressed, that should have been addressed. As it is, anybody can own anything and really fish anywhere and catch as much as they want, as long as they have the money to do it. And that's basically what it's become. It's become a fishery for people with the most money.
You've got to enable small boat fishermen a place, a sanctuary where we can make a living. And everybody can work with this. They did it in Iceland, they can do it here.
Gulf of Maine quota that was used to be caught offshore can now be caught right on the beach. I think they need to separate an offshore Gulf of Maine quota for cod and an inshore quota maybe, or a baseline restriction would help, or look at, no transferring Georgia's cod with Gulf of Maine cod. I mean, all these things will help for geographic fleet diversity. Because what we got going now is everybody can catch Gulf of Maine cod quota in one tiny little area.
There's one idea the council needs to consider is dividing the Gulf of Maine cod population into eastern and western areas. This would effectively put big boat effort back where it belongs while allowing for a sustainable inshore fishery to continue on for small boat businesses.
In conclusion, I'd like to say that changes have to be made fast. Inshore boats and fishing communities are disappearing. Cod stocks that grew during days at sea are now in trouble, and we need action now.
And the accumulation limits is going to be a tough battle, but they're needed. For me to hear that we're the only fishing, one of the only communities or areas in the United States that doesn't have caps or accumulation limits is deplorable.
And I've been fishing since I was 18. I'm going to be 22 this year. And I've always worked on small boats with small business owners, hard-working guys that started from the ground up. They built their business from nothing. And pretty much everything I've learned about life, I've learned in the past couple of years fishing, Any sense of responsibility I have, I learn on a boat. And pretty much the difference I've seen in the past year and everything is that it's just more and more the little guy getting squeezed out. These guys never tried to get more than they needed, They just want to be able to go fishing and support their families and stuff. They're not looking to have a big corporation. They don't want millions of dollars. They just want to survive, and that's pretty much what I want to do too. And the way things have been going with sectors and catch shares and everything, from what I see, it's, there's really no hope for me in the future to be one of those guys. And that's kind of what I'm worried about, and that's pretty much what I got to say. All right, thank you.
But basically what's happening is we are headed down the road of fewer and fewer people owning the fishery. And it is now, it's not going to be much longer, but it is a public resource. Quite frankly, I don't think any person has any right to own it.
When I think about fleet diversity, I think back in a time when when diversity was everything in this state. You had to be diverse to make a living, and at this point, we've had that taken away from us piece by piece through a number of years.
Basically now forced to be a sharecropper. I wasn't lucky to get a boat with a bunch of history, and I was doing other things before 1996 to 2006 with the magic years. I was catching other types of fish, but I've been a fisherman since 1984.
Since 2007, it's been very clear that there have been no significant concentrations of groundfish from the Kennebec River to Canada. That's 150 miles of U.S. coastal shelf, and probably about a third of the entire New England coastal shelf system. It's also about a third of the spawning habitat for every coastal groundfish fishery we have. Cod, haddock, pollock, your flounders. We've allowed them to be so decimated that there isn't a single full-time ground fisherman left east of Port Clyde.
As the stocks disappear, small boats disappear. It's a rule around the world. There are a few places where that hasn't happened. The Japanese inshore fishery has been managed fairly well. They still have a small boat fleet. Chile does pretty well. They have an inshore-offshore rule. Japanese have an inshore-offshore rule. Iceland has an inshore-offshore rule. They do pretty well. Right? These are Australia may in parts. I'm not sure. New Zealand may. Right. The point is simply that where management has addressed the issues of the diversity in the ocean, especially by addressing inshore-offshore questions, the area management approach that Jason was talking about. All right. Those are the places where small boats and a diverse fleet have managed to survive.
I think there's an inshore, a place for small boats inshore and a place for large boats offshore. There's something I feel is common sense that you learn as you go on the water. The further offshore a small boat goes, the less likely he'll come back. The further big boats come inshore after the fish, the less likely the fish will come back. And I think we've seen a tremendous effort on the fish inshore, and that's why they were decimated, as we expect.
I think one step in the right direction and probably would meet a lot of resistance, but I think a shift towards an owner-operator-based fleet is a good step in the right direction.
The fleet diversity means lots of different boats, lots of different size boats, different size fisheries. You know, myself, I'm not going to work my smaller boat in the middle of the winter 50 or 80 or 100 miles offshore, but I can still 8 months a year I can work the boat and make a living and provide for my family. And that's what I want to do. I don't want a handout. I'd like to stay in the business. I don't think I'm going to be able to. If Amendment 18 and fleet diversity can somehow distribute this quota more fairly, then I'm in favor of it.
There is a need for an inshore boundary so that small boat fishermen can survive or exist, should be closer to it. I think the bottom line is perhaps the big boats need a line so that they're not destroying spawning habitat, nursery grounds, and the opportunity for themselves to have a good, stable, robust fishery.
Whether you're a guy in a little boat, you're a guy with 3 big boats, when you get ready to sell, I think a certain percentage of your quota or your allocation needs to go to a permit bank.
I'm just thinking about lines as far as inshore, offshore. I think you've definitely got to, the line's got to be further off than 100 fathom curve. It's got to be out behind caches like that, maybe 50, 55 foot boat inside that. There's too much catching power with the big boats. I've been there, done it, and seen it.
I would really like to see owner-operator and size limit on boats, inshore, and I think it will help out the small communities along the coast here. Thank you.
What we've seen now through sectors is, because you're not limited with the trip limit inshore, and because large vessels can effectively purchase as much ACE as they want to, they are now coming inshore at a rate that is accelerating, and it's causing a tremendous amount of gear conflicts with us, especially because we're a predominantly fixed gear sector. I'm sure we've lost over 300 nets this year to conflicts with large draggers. We are now restricted in our ability to access the areas where we've been traditionally fishing, and certainly this has a dual effect of overexploiting the inshore ecosystem.
I guess one thing that we haven't discussed is what this consolidation has done biologically to the inshore Gulf of Maine. And I think that it has had some really nasty consequences with some very large vessels fishing in some very sensitive areas that they have never fished before. And I think there are and will be, I know there will be some major biological consequences to the fish stocks if that is allowed to continue.
There's two clear paths forward here. One is to do nothing, and you won't have fishing communities. You'll have, Portland, Boston, Gloucester, New Bedford, maybe Point Judith. Or put in some controls, input controls, like having to only fish in one broad stock area, and possibly preserve those communities.
So one thing that we propose, and is just something that that we're talking about internally as sectors in a network sense, is to perhaps look at different ways that you would declare into the fishery. So instead of allowing vessels to declare into 2 broad stock areas, if you're going to fish in Georges Bank, you would only be allowed to fish in Georges Bank. So you could only declare into 1 broad stock area at a time.
I think there should be a limit on leasing and a limit on the control of how much, what size percentage of the allocation you can control, similar to what was in place when we were at Days at Sea. And I think that there's definitely needs to be something done to protect the small boat fleet and the small communities throughout New England, because they are disappearing at an alarming rate. I've seen it in my own 2 sectors, and without some controls, they will be gone completely. I see that as a travesty.
I'm hoping that somewhere in this plan there's going to be a way to keep younger people interested in getting into commercial fishing. I have a 17-year-old son, and as I've seen with catch shares and sectors, I just get very nervous that my son will have to buy his way into fishing at some point rather than just earning his way into fishing. So that is my concern.
I think upon implementation of the sectors that they took the baselines off the quota that was originally there was original baseline constraints to each vessel's permits, and they lifted that when they went with quotas. Do you know why? Like, is there a specific reason, or just to make it easier?
I don't know the answer to that one.
But it just seemed like that would have been the simplest thing to leave the baseline attached to the to the permit and to the quota that the permit could lease back to other vessels, and that would have kept your fleet diversity without even changing anything. It seems like everything's overcomplicated now. It would have been simple just to leave that, and we wouldn't have had this issue. Would have never came up, because people that had big boats would keep their big boat quota to themselves, and people that had little boats would keep their little boat quota.
But, I just think diversity is very important, and I don't think it ever got enough attention with the sectors. And I think the only way to really, figure out what the fleet wants, or what may be good for the fleet, is to do more referendum stuff. You've got to ask the guys. I mean, guys don't show up to these things. And I'm very disturbed about, consolidation. I see through the AP process, a lot of lobbying. We saw it here with the clam boats 30 years ago. I mean, you can just look and see, and there was some ownership caps, but certainly not enough, and it all just trickled down to 3 or 4 huge players, and actually that fishery's in huge trouble, and nobody even talks about that because it's just owned by 3 giant companies or 4. Nobody even looks at that. What they used to catch in 4 hours takes them 3 days now. But it's been an amazing thing to watch, and we're seeing it with the general category scalloping. We're seeing instant consolidation. People are driving prices up, running off, bailing out. I mean, if you don't, the horses run out of the barn on the 2 or 3 of these, and we're trying to close the door here now. But I think moving forward, we really have to worry about monkfish. We have to worry there'll be no fleet diversity if we don't start smartening up.